Picture yourself at the controls of a vintage trolley car. You are hurtling down the track at 60 miles an hour, and your brakes have completely failed. Dead ahead, 5 workers are repairing the line, and if you hit them, they will all die. Looking at the schematic, you have one way out. You can veer onto a side track, but one worker is standing there. When faced with this scenario, most choose to turn the wheel. You sacrifice one life to save 5. It is a cold, mathematical optimization of human survival. 5 lives simply outweigh 1. Because the math is so simple and nearly everyone agrees on the outcome, the choice feels like a solved problem. We walk away from the tracks convinced that saving the most people is the only logical path. Now, move from the tracks to a hospital. You are a surgeon with 5 patients rapidly dying. One needs a heart, one a lung, one a kidney, one a liver, and the 5th needs a pancreas. You have no organ donors. But in the next room, a healthy traveler is taking a nap. You could quietly walk in, harvest his organs, and save your 5 dying patients. Look at this split-screen data. The math is identical, 5 lives against 1, yet the outcomes are completely opposite. Almost no one supports harvesting the organs. The 18th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham argued that the right act is whatever maximizes overall utility and happiness. When you steer the trolley to hit 1 person instead of 5, you are using what he called consequentialist moral reasoning. But your hesitation in the hospital introduces categorical moral reasoning. This is the belief that certain acts, like murdering an innocent patient, are wrong regardless of the mathematical outcome. We hold these clashing frameworks in our minds at once, yet we rarely notice when we switch from one to the other. In 1884, these abstract debates crashed into reality on a sinking yacht called the Mignonette. 4 men escaped the wreck into a tiny lifeboat. They drifted in the South Atlantic for 19 days with no fresh water and 0 food. One crew member was Richard Parker, a 17-year-old orphan cabin boy. He had ignored the advice of the older men, drank seawater, and was lying in the corner of the boat, dying. On the 20th day, Captain Thomas Dudley offered a prayer, stabbed the boy in the jugular with a penknife, and the 3 remaining men fed on his body so they could survive until rescue. This story is the ultimate test for utilitarianism. Does extreme necessity of survival justify cannibalistic murder? Imagine you are the jury, tasked with finding the line between justifiable necessity and murder. Let's isolate the variables. Would your verdict change if the men had drawn lots to decide who had to die? For many, a fair procedure cleanses the act. It shifts the narrative from an execution to a shared sacrifice. Now consider a second variable. What if Richard Parker had explicitly consented to giving up his life? That permission grants the victim agency, transforming the story from one of coercion into one of heroic martyrdom. These variables prove that our moral judgments don't just calculate the final body count. The process and the intent dictate the weight of the crime. In the actual trial, the legal system rejected the utilitarian defense. Captain Dudley was convicted because, in the eyes of the court, murder is murder. It was a legal victory for categorical limits over the simple math of consequences. But after examining your own logic, you likely find yourself with fewer concrete answers than you had at the start. This is the risk of philosophy. It takes the familiar, unquestioned settings of our minds and makes them alien. Once the familiar turns strange, it can't be unthought. Skepticism and shrugging off the problem are no longer options. This conflict between the math of the greatest good and the weight of individual rights defines our politics, our laws, and our lives. It is the silent engine of every decision we